Hi data scientists, my name is Jessica, and today we're going to be working on major that admitted the fewest students.
Okay, so let's first read through the question. Write the Python code to calculate the major that admitted the fewest students and leave a single row of that major as the only row in the data frame fewest students. So our solution should only have a single row for the major that admitted the fewest students, and that major should be stored in a column called major. So we can create extra columns if needed, but only major will be graded. We're going to be using some of the admission records from the UC Berkeley graduate program from 1973. So this is going to contain some information like year, major, gender, and admission. So it's important before we actually start coding to just think about what we're trying to do and the output that we want. So let's actually look at our data. So we're given this admission data with year, major, gender, and admission. And each row is basically a student that applied. So row 0 is a student, row 1 is a student. And we want to figure out that for these majors, A, B, C, D, E, etc., we want to figure out which major actually admitted the fewest number of students. And we just want to store that. We want our data frame to have one row, and it should have a major column with that major. Okay, so now let's kind of think about the steps that we need to take to figure out this problem. So the first thing that we need to do is if we look at our data here, we have the admissions data for people that were rejected as well as people that were accepted. However, we just want to find the major that accepted the fewest number of students. So we don't actually care about any of the students that they rejected. So first we want to filter our data to only include students that were admitted. Once we have a data frame with only students that were accepted, then we can go ahead and group our data by major, right? Because we want to find the major that admitted the fewest students. So we're going to group our data out by major. And then our last step will be to, once we have the number of students that are accepted for each major, then we can find the major that admitted the least students. So just to clarify, what grouping our data by major is doing is so that we can figure out how many students were accepted per major. Okay, so now that we have an outline for what we're going to do, let's go ahead and get started. So first, we want to filter out our data to only have students that were admitted. So this is just going to be a conditional like we've seen before. I'm just going to call this df accepted so we don't get confused between the different data frames. We're going to use our original data frame df, and we're going to look at the admission column, right? Because that's the column that contains whether people were accepted or rejected. And then we're going to say that we only want the students that were accepted in this data frame. So if we go ahead and print this data frame out, we can see that now our admission status is only accepted. So now that we have all the students that were accepted in the fall of 1973, let's try to figure out how many students were accepted per major. So then we can find the major that admitted the least. The way we're going to do this is we're going to actually use a group by statement. So I'm just going to call this df major. So we're going to take df accepted, which once again contains all the students that were accepted, and we're going to group by major. And the reason for this is because we're trying to find out how many students were accepted per major. So major is, we're trying to basically, if every row is a student, we're just trying to bunch these students up into different groups based off of which major they applied to. So that's why we're applying to major. And now we're going to aggregate. And a mistake that a lot of students make is using sum. Just because it honestly seems intuitive. We want to find how many students were accepted for major, and if each row is a student, then we just want to sum up the number of rows. But that's actually wrong, and let's see why. So let's go ahead and reset our index at the end. Now, if we try to print out df major right now, we get this. Okay, so what's happening? So we've grouped by major, so we did that correctly. So we have each major here. And then we just have the year column, and the year column has these really weird, really big numbers. So what's happening is that sum can only be applied to numerical columns or columns with number. And year here is the only column that's number. So what sum is doing is it's going it's going to the value at the column year for every row and it's adding them up. So it only works if you have numbers in your columns. For example, if you have major, well, you can't add A and A, right? So it's just gonna ignore those columns. And what it's doing right now is it's adding up all the years. So it's adding up 1973 a bunch of times for each major. And that's why we're getting these really big numbers. So we actually don't want to use sum. We want to use count. Again, we want to remember that each row is a student. And we're grouping the students by the major that they've applied to. So if you can imagine a bunch of students that applied to one major, we're putting them in a group, and then we just want to count them off, right? So if we run this, this is what we get. So let's go ahead and see what's happening here. We have these numbers, and why are they the same for all these columns? That's because the actual data in the column, the actual year, the actual gender doesn't really matter. We're just counting off the students. So we're counting the number of rows, which is because each row is a student, which is why each column is just assigned the same value. So what this means is that Major A accepted 914 students, Major B accepted 370, C accepted 321, and etc. So now that we have that information, we're almost done. Now we just need to find the major that admitted the least students. Well, just from looking at it, we can see that that's major F, but unfortunately we have to code that up. So remember, we want to return this in a data frame called fewest students. So I'm going to be calling it fewest students. And we're going to take our DF major data frame, which is right here. And we're going to use the n smallest command because we want the major that admitted the fewest students, so the smallest number. We know that the number is 47, so we just need to put in, so we only want the smallest, so I'm just going to put in 1. And then we also want to put in the column name. So you can actually choose any of these columns because, like I said, they're all the same number, they're all the same. I'm just going to put in year. So if we run our code, let's go ahead and print out fewest students. And now we can see that we have one row with the major column that has correctly the major F, and then you can just, these other columns will be ignored in grading. So we can just go ahead and submit that. And yeah.
Thanks for watching. That's how you solve major that admitted the fewest number of students.